Hello, hello. Welcome back to another episode of Star Wars Mark of Balance. My name is Mark. And how you guys doing? I feel like it's been a while. Hope you're doing good. And I am so excited for today's episode. We have a great topic that I hope you'll find interesting. With the release of Star Wars Visions in the next couple days, the anime-inspired Star Wars short films from some of the top anime studios in Japan, I wanted to look at the Japanese influences on Star Wars storytelling, from George Lucas to Dave Filoni to Jon Favreau and all different Star Wars creators that have put their stamp on the Star Wars story. And I'm really passionate about this episode, not just because of my love for anime and my appreciation for Japanese culture, but because I was kind of disheartened to see the, not backlash, but the resistance to Visions when the first trailer dropped by a lot of Star Wars fans. I know I went into the comment section, which you should never do, but I saw these ignorant comments about, oh, this isn't Star Wars, not watching, why are they doing this, is this even canon? And it just kind of took me back because I was like, these people don't understand all the great things that anime and Japanese storytelling have contributed to Star Wars, and Star Wars wouldn't even be close to the juggernaut it is today without these influences. So it kind of made me take a step back and say, maybe people don't understand all of this background knowledge, and I thought it'd be cool to step in, do my research, and deliver that knowledge to you. Whether you're just curious about it or you didn't even realize that some of your favorite parts of Star Wars came, in some cases, directly. I'm not even exaggerating. Some of these were word for word, beat for beat Japanese stories. And the past couple years, I've really been into Japanese culture and storytelling, obviously from anime. I started watching anime a couple years ago. Shout out Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. That was my first anime. Highly recommend. And then Ghost of Tsushima came out last year, and that was an amazing samurai game that had so much Japanese culture intertwined into its story and its level design and its world building. And all of this interest really culminated in me actually taking a 1-month course on Duolingo in Japanese. So yes, I did attend Duolingo University. I dropped out after a month, but it was super interesting, and I really liked getting involved in the culture on a deeper level, seeing how their language worked. And I definitely want to plan a trip to Japan in the very, very near future. And I put that passion and curiosity into something I loved even before anime, Star Wars, why we're all here. And I even learned so much from all this research. I even watched a couple of these movies because I hadn't seen them, and they seemed like huge influences on some of my favorite parts of Star Wars. So, I did my due diligence. I'm like, I gotta watch these. And my main goal by the end of this episode is two things. One, if you've never watched anime or you've never seen an anime movie or even a foreign language Japanese movie, my goal isn't even to make you watch them or force you to watch them, unless it's Attack on Titan. That's the only thing I force people to watch. But I really just want people to take away an appreciation for the culture and the entertainment that comes out of the country, because it seems like there is a lack of awareness of how much it is embedded into our culture today and our entertainment that we put out. I mean, this isn't Star Wars, but I recently watched an anime called Elfen Lied, and I was watching it and I was like, this is definitely where they got Stranger Things from. There is no way this is not a huge influence on Stranger Things. And later, after I finished the show, the Duffer Brothers came out and said, oh yeah, Elfen Lied was a huge influence on Eleven and her telekinetic powers, and Stranger Things is one of the biggest shows on Earth, and I would assume maybe 85%, maybe 90% of the viewers of it don't realize that it's heavily inspired by anime. So I hope to bring that to light to you, my great listeners and Star Wars fans. And the second thing I want to bring up is kind of a broader cultural discussion, which is the sharing of cultures and ideas is the best way for us to understand each other. Obviously, in the world today, everything's very divided and factionalized, and there's a lot of tribalism. And I feel like that's progressing backwards, because these sharing of ideas through art or any other medium really is what makes us innovate and move forward as a society and, become more empathetic of each other. And I think there's a lot of push to sectionalize things again, like, oh, if you're Asian, you're the only person that can make Asian content, or if you're Pacific Islander, you're the only person that can make Pacific Islander stuff. And absolutely, representation, cultural appropriation, all of that are serious topics. But I think our best creations and innovations as a human race come when we build off of each other. build off each other's cultures, build off past inventions from all over the world. And in the end, nothing is truly original. Even the influences I talk about today on Star Wars were influenced by Western ideas. Kurosawa, who I'll obviously talk about, some of his movies were directly influenced by Shakespeare plays. And I'm sure Shakespearean plays were influenced by Greek tragedies. And Greek tragedies were probably influenced by something else. If I've been unclear about what I mean by this tribalization, Ghost of Tsushima, which I talked about earlier in the video, obviously a game about a samurai in Japan, Japanese influences, culture, all that. That game was entirely made by a European studio, Sucker Punch. And a couple articles came out when it came out that it was cultural appropriation. Like, how could a European studio do a game like this? It undermines the culture. And I'm sure they had cultural advisors to make Ghost of Tsushima, and they came out with an amazing game that influenced me to go look at more Japanese art and culture. The funniest thing about that is, From Software, the developer of all the Dark Souls games, is a Japanese studio, and every single Dark Souls game is based in Western culture and ideology. They're all in this gothic European era of games. Bloodborne, all of the Dark Souls, obviously Sekiro was set in Japan, but all of the games leading up to that were all set in Western mythology and Lovecraftian horror and all this stuff. And it's just so funny that people forget that everyone is influenced by everyone else, and it's okay to cross those cultural boundaries. Here you have a European studio that makes a great Japanese game, and you have a Japanese studio that makes a great European game. I mean, it's so cool. I don't know why people fight against it. I think they have the right intentions, but it just comes off as so stupid and doesn't help anyone. I think the best thing about Star Wars is it is the combination of samurai films and old westerns. It is literally the embodiment of the Western and Eastern cultures coming together and setting it in frickin' space. And I think that is a huge reason why Star Wars has stood the test of time and is appreciated by so many cultures around the world. So with all that being said, that very long-winded intro that I believe was very much necessary, let's get into this and start talking about the influences on George Lucas and the movies. And as I mentioned before, this is no surprise. This is one of the most influential directors in history. Not just in Star Wars. I'm sure you've noticed his work in plenty of other things, but Akira Kurosawa is the gold standard for Japanese storytelling. I'm a real hypocrite because I haven't seen any of these movies, but I know of them and I understand the story enough, and I have seen their work being replicated. And also, I did my research, which is what you do when you can't talk from personal experience. So let's talk about the movie that started it all off, Star Wars A New Hope. Wouldn't you believe that it is not just heavily influenced by Hidden Fortress? That's almost an understatement. Some of the early drafts and treatments that George Lucas wrote for A New Hope had segments that were taken directly from Hidden Fortress and the premise and, what perspective he wanted to go for with his characters, which was actually hilarious to read that he literally just copied and pasted this. But George cited that he wanted to tell the story from the perspective of the two lowest characters. So in Hidden Fortress, there are these two peasants that agree to escort a man and a woman across enemy lines in the return for some gold. And these two people that they escort are a general and a princess. So when you think about A New Hope, two lowest characters, you would agree, are probably R2 and C-3PO. And they end up helping an old general, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and a princess, Leia Organa, in the return for some gold. Obviously, they didn't do it for gold, but Han Solo did it for the riches by returning Leia safely to the Rebel Alliance. And I just want to establish, obviously, influence doesn't mean, beat for beat, everything is the same, blah, 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 blah. And there might be other comparisons. Like I said, I didn't watch the movie, so I can't directly speak to it. But what I love about influences is that you can take these plots and completely transport them to a different location, put your own flavor to them, and they could be a whole new story with whole new interactions and influence people in whole different ways where they wouldn't even realize where the influence is coming from. And there were some other references to the sword fight between Darth Vader and Obi-Wan at the end of the film was very much reminiscent of a sword fight and showdown in Hidden Fortress. as Luke watches. And I loved seeing these plot points be imitated by George Lucas in this film. And you know what they say, imitation is the highest form of flattery. I believe Drake said that. So some other influences where Kurosawa popped up. Everyone has heard of the film Seven Samurai. It has been repeated, copied a bunch of times, but it especially pops up in the Clone Wars and Mandalorian. So the premise of Seven Samurai is that 7 Ronin samurai are hired to protect a village and their crops from bandits that want to steal them. This should sound familiar because in Season 2, Episode 7, Bounty Hunters in Clone Wars, this is the exact premise that happens on Felucia with Hondo wanting to steal the crops from these villagers, and they hire bounty hunters. Obviously, Ahsoka and the Jedi show up as well, but they train the villagers to fight, and they put their lives on the line to save the village. Same thing happens in Mandalorian Season 1, Chapter 4, Sanctuary, where there's this village, and Mando, Baby Yoda, and Cara Dune just happen to show up, and there's these bandits that want to take their crops. And why I think this story is beloved and replicated so many times over the years through all these different mediums is that it's a premise that forces your characters to grow and evolve. It challenges your character's worldview and forces them to either become a better person or stay the same. And if they stay the same, it's not much of a story. So in the case of the bounty hunters, they're simply there for the money. They're not doing it for the morally right reason. If the village burned, so be it, not their problem. By the end of the story, you hope the bounty hunters realize, and most of the time they do, that protecting the village is the valuable thing, not the money. Helping innocent people that can't protect themselves is a much greater reward than anything that they could have gotten from the villagers. In the case of Mando and the Jedi, they're there by circumstance. They don't have to help. There is no obligation for them to help these villagers. They simply stumbled upon this, and they could just go about their business. With Jedi, you obviously don't expect them to do that, but seeing them do it reaffirms what you believed about those characters like Ahsoka, Anakin, and Obi-Wan, that they want to help people. With Mando, at this point in the story, he's very callous. He doesn't care about people, but seeing him put in this situation forces him to reevaluate his worldview. He doesn't have to be a loner. He can be a part of something. He can protect this child, just like he helps protect this village. And that's what influential storytelling does. It's a timeless storyline that can be shaped and shifted into different contexts, different cultures, different mediums, but it always challenges the characters in the same way. And you always root for those characters to become better people because usually in the beginning, they're not so great or they're very self-serving, and by the end, they're selfless. And I'd be very surprised if Kurosawa wasn't influenced by other stories when he was making Seven Samurai. And there are plenty of other Kurosawa references throughout Star Wars. Rian Johnson directly cites one of his movies, Rashomon, as an influence for The Last Jedi and the whole sequence with Darth Vader and Ben Solo having different perspectives of the same event. Luke and Ben, my bad. And I encourage you to go read on them, but I want to move on and get a little bit deeper into the parallels between Jedi and Samurai. So there's some surface level comparisons between the Jedi and the Samurai. Obviously, the way they dress, the robes, the elegant look, the emphasis on the sword, the elegant weapon, the weapon is your life, Anakin. Those are obvious, I think. What I think is a little cooler is diving into the beliefs and the cultures that make the two so similar. So throughout history, there have always been codes that warriors live by. In the case of the samurai, this is called Bushido, or translated, the way of the warrior. Funny enough, this is the way has now found its way into The Mandalorian, and The Mandalorian has been compared to a masterless samurai, a Ronin, so it's kind of funny that that is now the tagline, this is the way, and it's kind of similar to the way of the warrior, which is Bushido. But Bushido shares a lot of similarities with the Jedi Code and how the Jedi conduct themselves. In my research, I found these 8 virtues of the Bushido Code, and one is rectitude and justice, and that's the one's power to decide upon a course of conduct in accordance with reason without wavering. So acting on reason instead of emotion. This is a theme that you've obviously seen with Star Wars Jedi throughout all of the mediums. When you make decisions based on anger, grief, frustration, it never turns out well. You must let cooler heads prevail and put reason at the forefront. Another of the virtues is benevolence or mercy. So a man invested with the power to command and the power to kill was expected to demonstrate equally extraordinary powers of benevolence and mercy. Another theme that we see with Jedi, it's not the Jedi way to kill an unarmed enemy. Luke, at the end of Return of the Jedi, he can kill his father. He can bring justice, but he shows mercy, and in the end, he is rewarded for that mercy and that benevolence. And that's what makes Luke so great, is his benevolence and his belief in other people. Another virtue I wanted to highlight was honor. Honor is within every warrior code, but I like the way they put it in this. Taking offense at a slight provocation was ridiculed as short-tempered. As the popular adage put it, true patience means bearing the unbearable. And this quote really jumps out at me when I think of Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan always sides with the light, no matter what tragedy befalls him. I mean, he loses everything throughout his entire life, and in the end, he still bears that. And he still ends his life as a good person and never falls to the dark side. And it was really cool to see this perfect parallel between these two codes and how Obi-Wan and his character developed throughout Star Wars and all the movies and TV shows. So those were just some cool tidbits I found from the Bushido code that kind of fit in with the Jedi code that I'm sure George Lucas knew about and learned and definitely wanted to integrate into his idea of these Jedi Knights. And speaking of the Knights of the Republic, the Peacekeepers, it is really cool how the samurai are set up into two different real time periods. In the beginning, they definitely leaned into more of their warrior side. They were armed government officials, peacekeeping officers. See how they worked in the word peacekeeping officers, same as the Jedi, and professional soldiers. And in the second half, in a time of peace and prosperity, they were more in touch with their spiritual side, more leaning into the arts and their own spirituality, and eventually they couldn't carry swords in public, so then they really had to rely on this martial arts training, this spiritual awakening inside themselves. And I think it's really cool how the Jedi combine both of those eras of samurai into kind of what we see in the movies. They're these warriors and peacekeepers when they have to be, but at the same time, when they aren't doing that, they're very spiritual, they're always meditating, they're always pondering the galaxy and the Force itself. And I'd be hard-pressed to believe that George didn't connect those dots there and come up with the idea of Jedi as these warrior monks similar to the samurai. One really cool thing that I noticed that really connects the Jedi and not just samurai but kind of this Japanese culture is the idea of hair. And no, I'm not talking about Obi-Wan's luscious locks or Anakin's. He had great hair in Revenge of the Sith. But I am talking about the Padawan little rat tail that gets ceremonially chopped off when they are upgraded to a Jedi Knight. When I watch these anime films or these Japanese stories, you notice that they always have their hair up in these tight buns. And whenever the character goes through an evolution, they usually cut that bun and they let their hair grow down. You could see this with Zuko in Avatar The Last Airbender. Obviously not an anime, but Zuko is from the Fire Nation, and the Fire Nation is cited as being very much influenced by Japanese culture. And recently with Princess Mononoke, the main character, he cuts his hair before his great journey. And the origins of this in Japanese culture is in the Edo period, where it's called the Chonmage, which was originally there to actually hold up the helmet and support the helmet in battle. And it was a status symbol eventually of these, high-class warriors. And when they cut it off, it signaled an end of that era of their life. And after that, they wouldn't have their social status anymore. So I kind of saw this connection as, Jedi Knights, when they go from Padawan to the Jedi Knight, they really do give up their past life. Like, they are fully committed to becoming a Jedi and a servant of the galaxy for the remainder of their life. And obviously, it is a cool storytelling moment. Like, it looks cool when a character, chops off their hair with a knife and then they're like a new person, a new drive. But it was awesome to see that it was grounded in Japanese culture. I mentioned the Padawans cutting off their little rat tails when they move up, but also Kanan Jarrus. It was a huge moment for him when he cut his bun and finally became a full Jedi Knight. He finally completed his training. He had talked to the Bendu, and he finally had clarity, and cutting his hair was symbolic of that character evolution. So that'll conclude my Samurai and Jedi comparison section. I hope you guys liked the historical relevancy, a little bit of history lesson in there, and some of my own thoughts, especially with the haircutting. I didn't see any references to that in anything, but I'd be very surprised if there was not any inspiration from there for George when he first came up with the concept of this hair tie or this hair rat tail thing. So now we'll be moving on to the anime portion, which I am excited about because I have seen these movies, so I can speak from experience. So one of the coolest inspirations I saw was that Dave Filoni directly referenced that Ahsoka is based on San from Princess Mononoke, which is a Studio Ghibli film from 1997, I believe. Beautiful movie, and after seeing it, I was like, oh my gosh, Rebels is so much like this movie. It's crazy. But I want to focus on Ahsoka and how many cues she takes from San in Princess Mononoke. So some early concept art with Ahsoka, you could see these tattoos below her eyes and these triangular formations, and this is very much like San in the movie, almost exactly the same. Obviously, as Ahsoka grows up, they change, but the original inspiration came from her in those markings. When you watch Princess Mononoke, you could see her fighting style is so much like Ahsoka's. You could tell that they were in the same kind of idea, that she would be very agile like a cat, be able to move on her toes, quick, fast movements, aggressive. All these things kind of encapsulate how Ahsoka fights as well. Something they also have in common is that they were both taken as young children and kind of trained in these different mythical arts, kind of. You know, Ahsoka was taken as a child and grew up learning about the Force. San, obviously, was taken by these spiritual wolves and was raised by the forest and learned to connect with nature that way, you know, kind of like the Force, connecting with other living beings, the living Force, the cosmic Force, all this stuff. And in the end, obviously, the characters aren't going to be beat for beat the same, but Ahsoka kind of has the same independence, free-thinking, ferocity in her delivery that San has as well, and you could definitely see where Dave Filoni drew from for Ahsoka. And, you know, later on in Rebels, Ahsoka, in her age and her wisdom, she definitely leans into this more spiritual figure where she connects with animals and the living Force more, obviously with the Loth Wolves and her little owl that always follows her everywhere she goes. You see that influence come back around, you know, not just from the concept art, but to later in her character evolution, which is really cool to see. And that kind of leads into Rebels and how much it's inspired, especially the later seasons, by Princess Mononoke. I mean, it's really incredible. Obviously, the huge spiritual wolves are pretty obvious, and the way they talk and how they're connected with the planet, but also how the wolves aren't good or bad. They just exist in the plane of Lothal, and they want to protect the natural world of it, similar to in the movie, Prince Mononoke. They want to protect the forest from the ironworks factory. The Imperials obviously taking over Lothal and mining and destroying the environment, and the Loth Wolves are fighting against that. Another thing, I was watching Princess Mononoke, and you see the deer god, the main god of the forest. He's this really cool-looking deer, and his feet, when he steps, you know, things grow out of him. And the feet of the wolves are exactly the same as the deer. They're not wolf feet. They are deer feet. And it was really amazing to see that almost perfect parallel between them. And this deer god serves another purpose. In the movie, he's not a good or bad figure. He takes life and gives life equally. He doesn't choose sides. He's not good or bad. He is just the will of nature. In Rebels, you have this figure called the Bendu, who is, I'm the one in the middle. I'm not good or bad. I simply exist and live on a higher plane. It's another theme in Princess Mononoke that there's no good or bad characters in the movie. They all are tempted by bad things, but they're all good people. Even the Ironworks people are good people. They just want to earn a living. The Force creatures want to protect their home, but they're also killing things to do it. And it's cool to see Rebels kind of incorporate that there isn't a good or bad side, because good people can be motivated by good things, Anakin, and still end up doing the wrong thing. So I like how Rebels really incorporates that godlike figure in the Bendu to illustrate this. And overall, Rebels really leans into this connection with nature theme. It's something I mentioned in my episode when I talked about Rebels, was that there was this big emphasis on not just Ezra, but all these different characters connecting with the animals on a spiritual and Force level and understanding them and not trying to kill them because they're provoked or something like that. And I think, that's coming directly from this movie, and that's something I didn't know until I saw this movie, and I was like, yep, that's exactly what they were going for. So that was really cool. Like I said, I learned a lot doing this research as well. And if you didn't get your fill of Princess Mononoke from just Rebels, don't worry. If you watch the movie and then go back and watch Mandalorian Season 2, Episode 5, The Jedi, where, ironically, the same person that was inspired by San, Ahsoka, first appears in Mandalorian, and that episode that she appears in is so heavily influenced by the premise of Princess Mononoke. The entire forest and the natural world around this factory kind of base is destroyed, and Ahsoka is obviously trying to help restore this area and this world. And the compound that the magistrate is in, where Ahsoka infiltrates with Mando, really calls back to the Ironworks factory and how much it destroys the surrounding area in Princess Mononoke. And the final fight scene between Ahsoka and the magistrate inside the compound is eerily similar to when San fights the woman that owns and runs the Ironworks factory. Another cool parallel that was way more obvious and was a full circle moment for Ahsoka's character. She was influenced by this movie in her early concept art, and now the first time she comes into live action after 12 years of her being a character, it's in an episode where the premise is exactly the same as the movie she was influenced by. So, really cool. And the final anime I wanted to talk about is Akira, one of the most influential animated movies of all time. I had recently watched it, and it was really cool to hear that George Lucas and Steven Spielberg was the first two to be offered to release the film in the U.S. Unfortunately, they didn't take it because they didn't think it would sell well to the American audience in the 80s when it came out. Obviously, it does very well now in re-releases and DVDs. Akira isn't a direct influence on Star Wars. It's more of an indirect influence on Star Wars. Akira was the first kind of animation to have very adult themes and mature content in it that was widely released. I mean, at this point in the US, it was really Disney movies that were really controlling the animation market. And those movies have those moments, but they're not dealing with the idea of humans trying to touch the form of God or ascend to the level of God or youthful alienation to the point where you become a monster. Like, they don't really touch those themes, but Akira kind of opened the door for more mature content and themes in animation. And when I say that, you should really think about Clone Wars, because Clone Wars really digs into some deep things. And a lot of people attribute, The Simpsons, Family Guy, any type of adult form animation to Akira's success, really. But there is one callback that you see in Star Wars to Akira, and I think it's a really cool one. It's when Dirge in the Clone Wars micro series, when he turns into that, tentacle-y monster thing, that is almost the same as when Tetsuo turns into the big abomination that he is, and he swallows up the main character, kind of like Obi-Wan gets swallowed up by Dirge at that point. And it's very similar. It's had to be influenced by it. I think Gendy even said it is. So that's really cool to see. And, some of the bike chases in Akira, they're so stylistic, but it does kind of remind you about Attack of the Clones and those chases on Coruscant. And so when you see that, you're like, oh, yeah, this could definitely be influenced. But like I said, all these things are also influenced by other things in America. Like Akira is a cyberpunk world and is definitely influenced by Blade Runner, which came out before it. And I just love when Western culture influences Eastern culture, and then Eastern takes that, flips it, and then influences Western culture with the same thing. And it just goes back and forth. And I love the idea of cultural sharing. And that's how we grow closer as a society and as a race, really. And I just want to talk about Avatar: The Last Airbender because I love it. Avatar is obviously not an anime, but it's very much inspired by anime, and the cultures within it are very Eastern cultures. As I mentioned, Zuko is from the Fire Nation, which is modeled after Japan. And Dave Filoni worked on Avatar: The Last Airbender for the first season. And he is obviously very influenced, as I've mentioned throughout this, by Japanese entertainment. So it was cool to see that he was a part of that, and also that he influenced the creators of Avatar: The Last Airbender. They're even quoted as saying Dave Filoni got them back into anime and Japanese films. And I'm sure that helped to facilitate different story beats in Avatar: The Last Airbender and made the show better as a whole. And spoiler for Avatar, but obviously, if you haven't seen that by now, you've lived under a rock. In the end of Avatar, Aang finds a way to win without killing, even though it's technically the right thing to do for the world. And you kind of see that similarity with Luke in Return of the Jedi, why I love Return of the Jedi. He wins by not fighting. And I really like how, once again, Star Wars influenced by Western culture, Star Wars influences Eastern culture produces Avatar: The Last Airbender, Avatar: The Last Airbender calls back to Western culture with Star Wars. It's a beautiful cycle, and let's keep it up. But with that, I really, really hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I had a lot of fun researching and talking about this with you guys. In the best circumstance, I hope this makes you explore anime or Japanese storytelling to some capacity. If not, I hope it just gives you an appreciation for it and maybe opened your eyes to see like, oh wow, I didn't realize how much came from those cultures. And the best part is, if you don't want to, you can just watch Visions on September 22nd, where I am sure that they will swing a lot of people's opinions because that set of short films looks great, and I'm so excited for it. I can't wait to review it here with another episode. Not sure how I'll set that up yet. I don't know if I'll do one episode for one movie or if I'll just pick my favorite ones, talk about those. I don't know yet. But thank you so much for listening. Stay safe. Stay healthy. Chikara ga anata to tomo ni amarasu yoni. I definitely butchered that, but that was May the Force be with you in Japanese. Jane.